Okay, so I've got, again in Photoshop, this, I've got to say, fairly ordinary rendering with some basic cut-out people there, and we've looked at putting a background in. So hopefully you have a reasonable idea about making layers. So this is just what I did last week. So basically we're just going to keep going with those approaches and maybe spend a bit more time looking at layers, but then also how to cut things out and then generate things using those cutouts, especially reflections, but also so shadows, but also reflections. Now, Revit is taking a while to render, but this should be done fairly soon. And so I'll bring a new image that I've rendered in from Revit as well. You can see here it's still rendering, but while it's rendering, I can just have a look at the settings that you should be using to render. So I'm sure I've been looking at the quality option here. And so what quality setting do you think you should have for rendering as a minimum? Yeah. Yeah, high, that's right. Yeah, spot on. Yep. Yep. So high as a minimum is definitely what you should be using for your submissions. But if you have time, use best. And with a project this size, you should be able to use best for a lot of them, unless you've got a lot of detail in there, and then it might take too long. So if it's taking too long, use high. So that's your quality, but then you've also got the resolution. So I've left the resolution there on screen, but again, for your submissions, you should set it to a higher setting than that. And so below that, you've got the printer option, and there you can set the resolutions that you're probably used to if you've done anything in Photoshop, or even if you've done anything with web graphics, or even looked at screen resolutions, or print resolutions. Do you have an idea of any common print resolutions that you would use these days? Do you know what the standard print resolution is nowadays? Okay, so a number you should remember, 300 dpi. So that's the standard. Used to be considered pretty high, but now that is standard for printing. Used to be 150 was standard and 300 was high. Now 300 is standard and 600 is high. But most printers still won't give you much of a difference if you go to 600. So I'd recommend just using 300 every time. And that will still slow you down a fair bit, because 300 is going to be a lot more pixels than you'll have initially. Maybe just to give you an idea, here my pixel dimensions are 800 by 400. If I go to 300 dpi, those numbers will go up to, at a guess, around 4,000 by 2,000, something like that. And so that is, what, 5 times, is that right? Yeah, 5 times roughly in each direction. That's 25 times the number of pixels. So that's 25 times the rendering time when you go to the proper resolution. And so that's why things take time to render. And even here, it's on high with that fairly low resolution. It's taking a little bit of time. You can see it's already been going 11 minutes, but that's partly because I've got other programs open. And also remember, the first 50% is usually slower than the second 50%. The first 50%, it's doing things like bounce lighting, so it's calculating the way the light bounces through the space. The second half is actually the rendering, and for most projects that will be faster. So this shouldn't take too much longer, but while that's happening, I can have a look at some of the resources I've gathered for you and show you those. So, okay, so back into Photoshop, and okay, so I've got some images that I've put together. In the Material Images folder, there's a furniture folder, and we'll just set this to all files. There we go. Okay, so it's going a little bit slowly, but that will open in a second. These computers. We're getting new computers over the holidays, so it won't be quite as slow. They're not bad, I mean, yeah. Yeah, no, they're not bad, but the new ones we're getting are 10 times better. They're really good workstations. They'll go to the high schools. Yeah, I know, I asked to. I would still like to have these computers as a vendor slave or something, but the new computers, if you're looking to buy a computer, have a look at the specs on these new computers, or even just have a look at the model. They're HP workstations, and they've done a good deal on them because they're selling a lot of them. You might be able to buy them cheaply from HP, and they may even have student pricing, but they don't always do that. And so. And yeah, have a look at the model. They're a good workstation, and I'd say even at full price they would be no more than $2,500, something like that. Yeah. But that's what a decent computer costs. I mean, a good one often is even a lot more. Okay, so I just wanted to show you how to get something like this into Photoshop, into your file in Photoshop, because the one I showed you last week was already cut out. This one you can see has a floor. So you have the polygonal lasso. So if you haven't already, try to play around with Photoshop. A lot of these tools are fairly intuitive, and so they begin at the top left with the selection tools. So the rectangular marquee is fairly easy to use, and if you click and hold down on that, you've got the different basic shapes. But then the one below that, polygonal marquee, isn't much more difficult. Again, you need to sometimes click and hold to see the different options. Right, so I'm just making sure it's on polygonal lasso tool, or polygonal marquee. And then I'm just going to, I'm actually going to do these things in two parts, since there's a gap between them. So I'm just going to do very roughly points around the thing I want to copy. Now, you could go closer than this actually. I'm just doing this roughly deliberately so that you can see how to remove things afterwards. So I'll do these next few points a bit closer. And early in my career I used to be really fussy with things like this, but then I've realised over the years that there's no need. Often people won't even notice, and in fact sometimes it can even look better if you have slightly rough edges. It looks more like a hand-done collage rather than something that's perfect. So don't be too fussy about the edges, and here you can see I'm deliberately going a little bit away from the object so that I get these things called ambient shadows. In other words, the shadows that go around the object where it touches the floor in this case. And they're a nice thing to give the object a bit more realism. So just these little ambient shadows will come in as well. And again here, just very roughly. Usually better to get too much than not enough. So there you can see I've missed it a bit on that edge, but I'll fix that. And that's one of the things I want to show you. So now, edit, copy or Control C, back into my file, edit, paste, and then using the arrow there, top left, I can move it, and then Control T is the shortcut for transform, and I can then scale it by holding down Shift to keep the proportions. Okay, so I'll just double click on happy. You can see that's still a little bit large, so again Control T and scale it down. So I'll adjust perspective in a minute, but before I do that, I just want to go and show you how to fix problems like this. Now, as you use Photoshop more, you'll, I'm sure, start using what's called masking, which is a really good technique you can use to take away problems like that. I'm going to show you the quicker and easier way, which is just to erase them. So you've got the eraser tool in the panel here, and again it could be on a different option there, so just make sure you click and hold to make sure it's on eraser, and it'll give you a brush. So you can see there the size of the brush. When you right click, it'll show the size and the hardness. So generally for erasing you want the hardness on 100%, so you get hard edges, and then the size you can adjust. So I'm going to make that very small, 4 pixels. And then you can see it's very easy to click and drag and just delete the edges. Okay, again my computer's got some issues, but there again, don't be too fussy. If you make a mistake, you can always Control Z to go back one step. So that's why it's often good to do small segments rather than trying to do everything in one go. Just brush in small bits like that, otherwise when you undo, it's going to undo all those steps. But if I just do Control Z now, it just undoes the last brush stroke. So small brush strokes often work better than big, long brush strokes. You can always zoom in to fine-tune things. So the key to it here is making sure you don't have too much white on the edge to make it stand out, and to get into the corner there, you just need to make the brush smaller. So you can keep right-clicking to do that, or the square brackets make the brush bigger and smaller. Okay, so square brackets just above Enter, and we can just get rid of that in the corner. Okay, you can keep zooming out then to check. So you can see there that arm looks pretty good, and now I can just go over this one, and again maybe starting with a slightly larger brush at first. Oops, don't want to go too much there, just want a bit of a corner. And if you're wondering how I'm zooming in and out, I'm just using the Alt key, and then the wheel on the mouse will let you zoom, just like it does in Revit. Control plus and minus work as well. Okay, so that might do for now. You could always do more later, but that's close enough. Okay, you can see then the perspective is not quite right, and so here you can try projecting lines to work out the vanishing point, or just do it by eye. So I'm going to just do it by eye, and so on the edit menu I'm going to go to transform and then perspective. So using that tool, you can skew the perspective differently. It's only got to be slightly different here. It's just got to come down so that it projects to the horizon lines about there. So that's probably about right. And then you can also try stretching it inwards, but I don't think it needs much of that here. We don't want that bottom edge to come down too much. Okay, the point there is you can correct perspective. That's getting a little bit better. And we can also adjust the lighting. So just going to Image, Adjustments, and you can use either brightness, contrast, or then I'm going to show you exposure. And so we can use that to match the exposure to what we have in the image. So you can see there that's much closer, and then the gamma correction as well can help. Okay, so there we go. So my rendering in Revit's nearly done. I'll bring that in a moment as well. So before I do the shadows there, I'll get another file and do the same thing. So I'm just going to go and open a file with some people that I want to get in the same way. So again, if you find people that are cut out already, then this is much easier. So the ones I showed you last week, remember the site I showed you can get people from? I'll show you again. Okay, so you should remember this one, really useful. Immediate. Anyone remember? Immediate Entourage. Okay, so this has a lot of free cutout people set up for the work that you do. Okay, because they're a standard thing in your perspectives, and all the work you do that should have that's been designed for humans, you should have some sort of reference. It doesn't always need to be a photorealistic person like this. It can just be a silhouette, and sometimes silhouettes look the best actually, but depends on the graphical style you're going for. Okay, so these already are cut out for you, which is a good thing. That makes life much easier. But they won't always be cut out. So these you can see are not cut out. Okay, so again, you can use the same technique I showed you. Just use the polygonal lasso and cut them out roughly. You don't need to be too fussy, again, with the edges. You can try using the magnetic lasso in situations like this. Sometimes it actually works. It's a bit of a funny tool, this one. But you can see there what I'm doing is just tracing there and then clicking points only when I have to. So all of those points that are white have just been done automatically for me. You can see there it's made a bit of a mess of the mouth, so I'll go and fix that afterwards. But it does work pretty well for obvious edges like this. So honestly, Photoshop should be one of your main tools, and you should already be starting to use it just to cut out things that you found. You won't be expected to draw beautiful people in your perspectives. It's a lost art. No one does that anymore. Even though you should be able to draw people actually, but most of the ones that are used in the sorts of work you do will be done using Photoshop. I don't know, do any of you still draw people into your perspectives? No. Yeah, it's just good just to be able to do not a bit more than stick figures, but it's like a silhouette that's got that almost like you see in fashion design, that style of figure. Yeah, with the main outlines, that's a really important skill to be able to do that, and so hopefully doing that. But then once you can get the Photoshop style you want, or the style you want with Photoshop, they'll give you a lot of options. Okay, so again here, letting the magnetic lasso do most of the work. I don't want to chop her arm off. I have to go and fix that. Someone's already chopped her arm off, but I'll go and put it back in. Or is her arm behind her back? No, sorry, that is her shoulder, not her elbow, not her sleeve. So that's all right. Okay, with hair, definitely don't be too fussy. No one will notice if you give them a bit of a haircut. And so again, you can easily go and then add in any bits that have been missed. If you switch back to the regular polygonal lasso instead of the magnetic one, hold down Shift to add to the selection. So it's a bit different to Revit. Revit uses Control. But you can easily remind yourself when you hold down that button, it'll give you a plus or a minus. Anyone know what the subtract or the deselect option is in Photoshop? Yeah, no, it's Alt. Alt. Yeah. So you can tell it's a bit hard if you haven't got it open, but when you hold down Alt, you'll see it'll go with a minus symbol. Shift gives you the plus. And in Revit it does the same, but it's Control and Shift in Revit. So I can just keep doing Shift to get maybe a little bit more of the hair. Not that we really need that. Okay, so just continuing to hold Shift here. Okay, so again, Control C, and then I've got to go up here to get back to my file. Control V, and I might turn those other people off. Control T, and I'll replace them with this better person. Okay, so how do you know how tall she should be? Eye line, that's right. Eye line should be at horizon line, depending on the height of your camera though. So if your camera or your viewpoint is above the normal eye line, then the eyes would generally be below. And then if your camera point's below the eye line, then the eyes will be above. Oops, let us do that again. So I just let go of Shift there. Oh, you can. Yeah, it just has special doors for curtain walls. Yeah, but you can. Yeah, yeah. So they're curtain wall panels, but they have those for doors. Yeah, yeah. No, I'll show you. I'll show you in a minute. Okay, so there you can see the feet probably need to come down a bit more, and then I can get an idea of the eyes. But so she definitely needs to be, oops, down. Okay, so the horizon line is about here, and I know this camera point is actually a bit below normal eye level. But I'll show you another trick you can use to help set that up in a second. So I've got here my my render, and so now I'm going to go to export, just like I did before, and save it as what format? Do you remember the format? So this is probably the most important thing when you're going to work with your own renders, to know which format to choose. Of these options down here, BMP, JPEG, PNG or TIFF. Which one? Hopefully you've been doing this. You should set that. So even if you haven't finished your design, you should do this way definitely. So PNG is the one you should be using. PNG or TIFF. But if I was you, I'd be using PNG. It's a lot easier to use than TIFF. Okay, so I'm going to save that file, which will give me a copy of exactly what I can see there. Now I'm going to open it. So you can see why, again, a PNG is so useful. Okay, so notice how the windows are cut out automatically. If you don't save as a PNG or a TIFF, it won't do that. Okay, so I don't want to... Yeah.
Question. It's got just the white part?
The background. The background. Anything that's sky, that's background image.
Yeah, but in any image like normal tree. Any image like...
Yeah.
If it has white, it's going to cover?
No, not white. The background. So what would be the sky? So through the windows. Yeah, only the things in the background are cut out. Yeah. Okay, so now I want to bring this into the Photoshop file I've been working in. So again, to select all, Control A, to copy, Control C. Now back to my original file. And I'll just do Control V. And it's put that over the top of everything. Now notice I'm not doing all the work again. I'm just going to drag this layer down to where I want it to be in the list, and then these things will go back on top. Yeah, so that's, yeah, you can reorder your layers. Yeah. Yeah, I know, yep. And so there's my original rendering there. I might want to go back to that, in which case I could just turn it off. Or I could even, if I'm happy to discard that, drag it onto the trash can there to delete it. So I might do the same thing just to get a different sky. This is a darker rendering that I have now. I can still go and brighten it up a little bit going to exposure, and I will do a little bit of that. Now notice it's not doing anything to my rendering because I don't have that layer selected. It's adjusting my background. So I'm going to select the right layer and then go back to adjustments and exposure, and I can brighten that. Also gamma is good for correcting things. It just seems to give things a bit of solidity when you correct that gamma. Okay, so notice the columns really just get punched out when that is fine-tuned, and your eyes will tell you when it's right. So maybe I'll just repeat that with the background. So this background, even with the adjustments, I'm not really happy with it, so I'm going to get a new one. So back to open, and I'll go and find another sky. So again, back into material images, and I've got two backgrounds folders, background and backgrounds, and then also a skies folder. So they all have different backgrounds, skies and other things. And maybe this one is what I want. So again, Control A, Control C. Back to the original file. Here I've got the sky layer selected. So if I paste in now, it'll go above that layer. So there's my sky, my new sky. The old sky is there still next to it, so I might just turn that off to get it out of the way for now. And then again, Control T, I can use to both stretch and move that image. So that's much better. Oh, cheers, thanks a lot. Okay, so you want to try to get the horizon line right, but the main thing is that you get the colours right. So that will help, but when you position it correctly, but then also making adjustments. So back to exposure. You can use brightness contrast as well, but I just like exposure for these things. And then try gamma. You can see there getting a bit of contrast between the interior and the exterior helps a lot. And even if you're using exposure, still try brightness contrast. It can also work in a different way. happened a little bit. Oh yeah, sure. Okay, so hopefully using those techniques you can both bring images in as your backgrounds and also into your foreground. And oh yeah, I thought I'd show you a trick to get the people to be the right size. You should be able to do it entirely in Photoshop eventually, but sometimes it can help if you just use a few little tricks with Revit. So what I'm going to do is put in a person using those boring people you have in the Entourage family. So make sure you're aware that you do have that family called Entourage, male or female. So it's just called, what is it, female and male? RPC, sorry, RPC female and RPC male is the other one. So the reason I say they're boring is because you only have, what is it, 6 females and not even as many males. So I'll show you the male one if I go load family. And then again it's in the Entourage folder, and here's the male one, RPC male. And so here, looking at the properties, we've got, so only 4 men, 6 women. So if you keep using these, people looking at your presentations are going to get sick of them before long, because everyone has the same 10 people to choose from. But what they're useful for is getting an idea of scale. So here, Dwayne actually is not that tall. Some of them are taller. Alex is not that tall either. Lauren, I think, is the tall one. Yeah, here we are. But I might use, since I'm working with a female, not Kathy because she's got a suitcase, maybe Tina, Lisa. Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm going to go over it anyway. This is just as an idea of size. Maybe I'll use the same one as we've got over here. So that's Florence. That's okay, I'm going to replace her. So all I want is a rough idea of the size and things like the shadows. Like I said, you can work it all out, but why not let Revit do the work for you? So here I'm going to set it to draft, and then go to render again, and this will render really quickly because it's on low quality. It's a really useful technique you'll find with furniture as well. Often you can just dump things in as a placeholder. You're not going to use them in your final image, but it'll help you to work out the size. And so later on I'll show you, maybe also you'll be shown in your next subject how to do these things in Photoshop, drawing lines to the vanishing lines to the horizon. But I do most of this work on a drawing board still. I just find it easier. Okay, so there is my draft image. I'm going to save this using export as a different file name. Now I'm going to open that. Okay, and then again, Control A, Control C, into my other file, and going to the level above my my sky, Control V. Okay, so now I can turn the quality layer off, and there you can see my my person that I can use to work out the size of this one that I actually want to use. So I can overlay her Control T, might make it a little bit taller. But there we are. Okay, so it's just there to help me work out the size. So I could do the same with a chair. So I might have that a little bit out, and it just might be very difficult to work out in this view. But again, if I just model something that I know is roughly that size, so back into here. Okay, so it's basically a cube shape on the ground, and another one over here. So I'll just do that. So I'm going to go and draw in using model in place. Make an extrusion. In fact, I'll draw a rectangle and then rotate it, might be even easier. So we can make it maybe 700 by 700. And then rotate it. Okay, it doesn't need to be perfect, it's just a guide. So the height there, 700, that's probably okay. And then I'll copy it very quickly for the next one, which is a bit smaller. So go back in and make it 500, no, it's probably 550. And rotate it around a little bit. Something like that. Again, doesn't need to be perfect, it's just a guide. So in my perspective view again now, I can see those things and compare them. Probably needs to come across a little bit. So fortunately moving things in perspective views can be more difficult than it should be in Revit, so you need to switch views sometimes. There we are. Not far off. Okay, so then, oops. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing, rendering a draft copy that I can use to get these placeholders into Photoshop. And so this is really the key to getting the sorts of presentations you'll see the final year students doing. A lot of it is added in Photoshop. You'd be surprised how much. So this one you can see up here, you know, almost half of the work you can see in those rendered images is done using Photoshop, not straight out of Revit. Okay, so again, export. So I'm doing it as a PNG. Oh. Okay, again, Control A, Control C, Control V, and that your fingers will just start doing that automatically once you start using Photoshop a little bit. So I'm going to delete this. Oops, sorry, wrong layer to delete. So layer 7 is the one I wanted to delete. And then pasting in, so then I can see, well, my perspective wasn't too far out actually. So there's my chair, and you can see then looking at the cubes, I'd be happy with that probably. I can maybe adjust the position, oops, so making sure I get the right layer there. There. Right. But if you're unsure of your angles, just having boxes like that is a really good way of checking things. And notice how I can also get an idea what the shadows are doing there from these placeholders. Okay, so the final thing I'll show you again is how to do shadows. I think we'll maybe do reflections if we have time next week. Okay, so I've got the this cutout person, and now I'm going to go to magic wand. And then using the area outside of her, I can just click to select, and that will select a cutout of her, but basically going around. So that's all of basically all of the image except for her. So now I want to invert that on the select menu, go to inverse, and that will switch it to the cutout. Right, so that's the quick way of selecting anything that you've cut out previously. And then I'm going to make a new layer. Okay, now I might turn off the rendering and bring back the high quality one, because I know the shadows need to go down this way. So I'm going to make a new layer, and then Control T. Oh, sorry, I've got to fill it with something first. So there's nothing in that selection at the moment because I made my new layer, which is empty. So I'm just going to go and fill on the edit menu. You can use the paint bucket, but fill is a good option. And we'll just go 50% grey. Okay, so now if I go Control T, I can drag that straight down. And just bring it a bit up so that it goes along with the feet. Right, now, if you want to do just straight shadows, that's not a bad option, just using grey as the fill. But I'm going to show you another option, which is to use full black. So I'm going to go back to fill and fill with black instead, which you might think is way too dark. But what you can do then is set the mode for this layer to multiply. Then adjust the opacity. So I'm going to bring the opacity down, and notice how now it's basically giving me a darker version of the floor. So, and that's the way shadows should look. It shouldn't be either full black or full white or full grey. It should be a darker version of the material that it's casting a shadow on. Okay, so that's how you do it. So multiply and then use the opacity to adjust that darkness. Now you'll see as well later that you can make the edges softer and do lots of things like that, and there are some really good websites which will show you that as well. But all I'm going to do now is maybe skew that a little bit. And so on the edit menu, you can go to transform and then skew. Let's take it this way, even though in reality the shadows go slightly different, but this is what people would expect to see because of the way the perspective is. Okay, so that's all my transforming done. And now I'm going to select that with a rectangular marquee so that I can blur it. So on the filter menu, I'm just going to go to blur, and then I'll just do a few of those. So we can go blur more, just to get a softer edge on the shadows. So that's a really easy way of making the shadows look a bit more realistic. Okay, so there we are. So I might even just go and skew that a bit more. Okay, so again, we know from the other render that the shadows don't actually go like this, but sometimes it's better to do the things you expect to see rather than what's technically correct. Because you can see here the shadows really go straight down, but it doesn't look right. That looks better, having it at the angle of the perspective. Okay, so you can do reflections in a similar way, but again, I'll show you reflections later. And that should be enough. Oh, sorry, very last thing. So the lighting on her is a bit too bright. So don't forget to adjust those things as well. So just with brightness contrast, you could do that. Again, later you'll see there are better ways of doing the lighting on your cutouts, but worry about that later on. So that should be more than enough to get your images enhanced once you've rendered them out of Revit. Make sure you do some things in Photoshop, and particularly adding Entourage like people, but also furniture and things like that as well. So again, the shadows can be done the same way that I just showed you with the person. And then make sure you keep saving your file as a Photoshop file. Period 1, that'll do. Okay, by saving it as a Photoshop file or a PSD file, then you can go back and work on the layers and do all of those things. But if you save it as a TIFF file, you can keep layers as well, but I don't want the layers, so I'm going to save here as a TIFF and turn that layers option off. Okay, TIFFs are a good format. They can do lots of things, but sometimes they do too much, and in this case I don't want the layers. So I'm going to save it as a TIFF with that layers option turned off. Click save and leave all of these options on the default setting. So just going to click OK there. Now back into Revit. And so one thing I noticed with the last assignment is that a lot of people used the default title blocks, which are just too technical. So try and use a nice clean title block. We've got a few for you here, but you can probably make those even cleaner by just removing anything that's not necessary. So here I've got some that are completely blank, and then others that just have a little bit. And they're much better than the ones that look like technical drawings. So it could even be cleaner than this. You could probably take all of that logo stuff off on the left. So I'm just going to, well, show you how easy it is. Just like any family, you can double click on it to open it, or click Edit Family at the top, and then just delete things if you don't think they're necessary. Sometimes even the lines there make it just look way too technical. Okay, so I'll save this now as a new family. Load it back into the project, and I can go and make any sheet I've made use that title block just by selecting the page border there and choosing my new file or my new family in the list there. So this is going to be probably, instead of client, it's going to be your name. Project name, obviously. And then the sheet name. Okay, so that would be plenty. Could even have less than that, but that's, so you might not need a date on there. Okay, and so then to bring that image in, you can just go to Insert, Image, and find the file you've saved in Photoshop. So there's my TIFF file, and now I can place that easily on any page. Okay, so you can use Revit to do a lot of your layout. Like I said, once you know InDesign, or if you know it already, I'm happy for you to use that instead. But Revit will do everything you need for this subject. That's a bare minimum. And so if you're bringing in an image from another file, then to give a label, you can't just choose that from the settings in Revit. You need to draw in your own text on the Annotate tab. You have the text tool. Okay, so it's not on architecture. You can't use model text. You have to go to Annotate and then find text. And then just, if you haven't used this sort of text before, choose the size in Properties. And just draw a text box that way. So okay, so you should label all your views, no matter what. Even if it's just a small label like that, it's often a good, actually, don't make your labels too prominent. That's a good tip for a lot of design drawings as well. People sometimes make them get a bit too technical with the labelling. Okay, so that makes sense. When you, if you're going to use other programs, make sure you know how to bring them back into Revit, and you'll still need to make a PDF file from here for your final submission. And well, maybe that's something we can do more next week. But anyhow, so is there anything you're not sure about the process? Yep. I know it'll take a bit of practice getting used to Photoshop if you haven't used it very much, but the only way to learn is to try it, and it is a fairly intuitive program. Once you spend some time with it, you'll see it doesn't take long to learn those basic things I've been showing you.